Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, Rebuilding Better, the Role of Training in Education. This webinar is a part of our Rebuilding Better webinar series. If you're not familiar with the GGKP, we encourage you to visit our web platforms and to join the growing green growth community at ggkp.org/subscribe. I'm In-Woo Jung, Senior Knowledge Officer and Platform Manager for the Green Growth Knowledge Platform. We are very happy to have you with us today and hope you're safe and healthy. Today, we are fortunate to be joined by experts from Civil Service College Mauritius, United Nations Institute for Training and Research, American University of Central Asia, and the Global Green Growth Institute. And of course, you, as our audiences, are an integral part of every webinar. During the webinar, please feel free to submit comments and questions through the questions box found in the webinar interface. It's a great opportunity to engage directly with the experts, and we will try our best to address all questions as time allows. A full recording of the webinar will be made available after the webinar. To view previous webinar recordings and to stay up to date with upcoming ones, please visit the GGKP website or subscribe to the GGKP YouTube channel. After the webinar, we would appreciate it if you could take a few minutes to complete our short survey. The feedback helps us to continue improving our webinars. It is now my pleasure to introduce the moderator for today's event, Benjamin Simmons, Head of Green Growth Knowledge Partnership Secretariat. Ben, I'm delighted to welcome you to today's webinar. The floor is yours.
Thank you, In-Woo, and welcome colleagues. It's a great pleasure and honor to be facilitating today's webinar. We are quite fortunate to have such a distinguished group of experts joining us today. I'm going to actually move right into introducing our panel to ensure that we have enough time for an active discussion and debate, and to ensure we have some time to discuss questions, hopefully raised by you, the participants, through the chat box. So if I may, I would like to begin by introducing Ramesh Durberry. He's the Director General of the Civil Service College in Mauritius. We are delighted to have you today with us. Next we have... Hi, Ramesh, great to have you here. Next we have Angus Mackay. He is the Director for the Division for Planet at the United Nations Institute for Training and Research, UNITAR. Angus, I have to say I love the name of your division, Division for Planet. It's fantastic. It seems the division for superheroes. Thanks for joining us today and definitely partnering in today's webinar. We're also happy to welcome Akalai Mukhtar Bekizi, Director of the Master's Program in Economics and Head of the Sustainable Development Center at American University of Central Asia. Akalai, a very warm welcome to you. And last, but certainly not least, we are joined by Mariski Nirwan. She serves as the lead in the Global Green Growth Institute's Knowledge and Capacity Development Program in Indonesia. Mariski, welcome. So as you can see, we have an incredible panel, and we're definitely looking forward to your insights. As In-Woo, my colleague In-Woo mentioned at the outset, in addition to the panel, we are of course also very interested in what all of you have to say, the audience. So I strongly encourage you to make use of the discussion space. As today's discussion unfolds, I will be turning to your comments and questions and do my best to integrate these into the discussion. Today we'll be discussing three big issues that the panelists will address. The first is to explore how COVID-19 is reshaping the education sector and learning. You know, many regions of the world are experiencing really a devastating second wave of the pandemic, which is impacting nearly every aspect of life and forcing education and learning institutes to completely rethink how education and training are delivered. The panel will then examine how environmental and sustainability issues are currently being taught and explore some of the risks associated with the status quo. Finally, the experts will bring these two discussions together to offer some thoughts on the future role of training and education and how those can contribute to a green recovery. After the panel discussion concludes today, we have a very exciting event. We'll have a short presentation by UNITAR for the launch of a new green learning network. This is an excellent development, and I'm looking forward to that. So without further ado, Ramesh, I was hoping I could kick off the discussion, that you might be able to kick off the discussion for us. As the Director General of an institute dedicated to providing training and education for public officials, we're very interested to see, to understand how you see COVID-19 reshaping the education center. the education sector?
Yeah, I think I'll talk a little bit more what's happening in Mauritius. As you know that at the moment we are a little bit of COVID-free. We are just have imported cases. Bold decisions have been taken by the government. But in terms of the education sector, it has been affected as in any parts of the world. You know, about 1.6 billion of children has been affected by closure of schools and universities. In Mauritius, we have taken very serious steps. We have tried to extend the academic year. You know, it has really changed the way we're thinking. Parents are asking questions, how the education is going to happen, how the children will get the education, the curriculum. Will we be able to address all the curriculum in the academic year? So there has been lots of questions being asked. If we look at the primary or the secondary or even the tertiary sector, I think everywhere we're having the same problem. You know, we all want to have education being delivered to our children, but how do we do that? Sometimes we start asking questions about what we mean by educating our children. You know, we want our children to think creatively. We want them to start solve problems. And how do we do that when we are hit with such a pandemic? You know, children are staying at home. How do we do that? It's the same for public officers when we are doing training at the Civil Service College. You know, public officers need to have training to enhance their competencies. And how we do that if we're not bringing them to the college? So fortunately, when we talk about adult education, you know, and fortunately in Mauritius, the internet connectivity is quite good. So we are delivering online programs. But after the lockdown, what we have done at the college, for example, if we have managed, you know, social distancing in a group, you know, where we used to have 30 people in a class, now we are having only 15 people. So although the interaction has reduced considerably, the way we are teaching is not that big group, but still we are carrying on. We have to deliver the training. Interaction is less because we have less people from different ministries coming to share the knowledge. But we have to do it. You know, it's a way that we have to share the knowledge. So we're trying to find ways. We have at the college open access platform for public officers, and the demand is increasing, which is good. You know, before the pandemic, we had that platform. The demand was quite low. But with the pandemic, we have seen an increase in the demand for online courses. So it's a change in behavior. You know, there are people feel that they need for training, and I think it's kind of forcing the people to adopt technology in a way, forcing them that they have to start thinking differently, change their behavior. And I think sometimes it's a new way of thinking and adapting to the situation.
Thanks very much. Yeah, and it's interesting what you say. I mean, you know, on the one hand, you said the interaction has been reduced, but at the same time, you're seeing this jump in demand for online courses, and it's increasing, and that it's really forcing your institute to adopt and rethink how they deliver knowledge and training. Next, Angus, if I may, UNITAR, you know, is a global leader in developing and providing skills for countries and individuals. With, I think now you have literally thousands of courses and training events, serving hundreds of thousands of people around the world, focused on many issues, including implementation of Sustainable Development Goals. So I'm interested, given your vantage point, how do you see COVID-19 impacting training and education?
Thank you, colleagues, and thanks for organizing this debate. It's a great one to have, and it's an ongoing one. I mean, I think the first point I'd like to make is that I think that education systems, and I mean general education, but also training, you know, I think they've done an incredible job in adapting to the current circumstances. But I think we've really only just begun to process what these implications might be. And one of the reasons for that is that we really don't really know what the future holds. I mean, we're still in this kind of stop-start situation of wondering whether this is going to be our lives for the next 5 or 10 years, or whether it might just be another 6 months if someone comes up with a miracle cure. So I think the sort of fundamental systemic changes, which may or may not happen, have only just started to be considered. I was reflecting back on 100 years ago. You know, there were active education systems during the Spanish flu. That was a major event, global event, and it came to an end. So did everything go back to normal after that? I'm sure everyone was saying, oh, the world's changed and it's not going to be the same. I suspect that things pretty much did go back to normal. Of course, the difference now is that we have technology. We have these platforms that Ramesh was referring to, and maybe that's the casting difference. I guess I see two things happening. I mean, they're relatively obvious. Well, one's obvious, one less so. The obvious one, of course, is that we're having to go online, and we're seeing here relatively well-resourced institutions responding quite well. A little bit of guidance, perhaps, but doing a pretty good job. And not only where you might expect. For example, we work with the École Nationale d'Administration in Senegal, which is a civil service training institute, and they have switched to Teams for most of their trainings. And they've found that this has been a great way of reaching out to more people at low cost. So that seems to me to be something that will probably continue. Once you've got the systems set up and they seem to work, then that's great. So we can probably see that kind of thing continuing. But what about those less visible countries or situations? And here I really think that we haven't seen enough evidence, but I would imagine there's been a tremendous amount of disruption. So as a UN entity, we're concerned about the more vulnerable and the less visible. I'd say the other key point that we've noticed is there has been a massive increase in demand for content on sustainability. And I think that that's probably for a number of reasons. I think the COVID pandemic itself is to some extent an environmentally driven problem relating from how we manage our biodiversity, our wilderness areas. But also as a result of it, of course, we saw that great reduction in pollution and that sort of, visible benefit, it seems, to human health in relation to improving air quality in some circumstances. So this is interesting because at HLPF, we got a fairly gloomy picture about the performance of the SDGs and that they appear to be lagging. But actually, when it comes to learning and training, we appear to be getting a bounce, a positive bounce effect. And I think that this bodes very well for the future. So, as far as UNITAR is concerned, we're reaching more people, many more people. But the question, Ben, I'll hand it back to you on this point. The big question is, how well are we reaching them? Are we still able to say, yes, we're changing attitudes, mindsets, and action is happening as a result? And I think the picture is still a bit early. But back to you.
Yeah, no, thank you. That was very interesting, and you're right. I mean, this isn't the first time that the world has dealt with epidemics. I mean, I think certainly this one is unique, just given how just given the impacts of globalization and how linked everyone is and connected. And I think you made a very interesting point around technology too. That's clearly has changed the game, so to speak. We've also, it's interesting just to reflect a little bit. I mean, GGKP has also seen a very similar trend to what you've indicated, that there is this massive increase in the demand for information on sustainability. I think that rings quite true through our experience as well. So thank you so much for those comments. Next, I would like to turn it to Akilai. Akilai, you're with the American University of Central Asia, which is a liberal arts institution, and you direct the Masters in Economics program and the Sustainable Development Center. And so I think you're in a very interesting position as well to give us a sense of what sort of changes are you seeing and do you anticipate as a result of the pandemic?
Yeah, thank you. And I would also want to say a little bit about the Central Asian and Kyrgyzstan experience related to that. So the COVID-19 has resulted in schools and universities moving online all around the world. And like in Kyrgyzstan currently, we still have school and university teaching undertaken remotely and on digital platforms. And we are not sure whether we'll be able to go back to offline teaching till next summer. So in Central Asia, moving to online learning was unplanned and rapid, with lack of training, insufficient infrastructure, little preparation. And at first, we need to accept that it resulted in a very poor learning experience. Now we see that there is a high potential actually for new models, for new education models like hybrid models, and implementation of long-awaited reforms in education sector. Because we didn't have reforms since Soviet Union times, like for 30 years. And actually, I wouldn't call what we have now like a proper online learning and like distance learning. It's more like providing an emergency access to education, but it doesn't really have all the tools and instruments necessary for a proper online education experience. So one of the biggest challenges that we see in Central Asia is that learning through current mechanisms, because mainly teaching is now provided through television, is like incompatible with teacher feedback. And we observe more students dropping out from school and from universities, unfortunately, due to economic reasons, but also because it's harder to keep them motivated and interested in what they're learning. And another big challenge is actually inequality in access to this online and distance learning. While we have some countries in the region like Kazakhstan, where 70% of students have access to internet and like laptops at home, but in Tajikistan, let's say less than 10% of students have that access. And while in Kyrgyzstan, let's say the population is poor, people will use smartphones to get access to online education. But like if you have one smartphone and 3 or 4 people in the family who have to study, then it becomes like much more challenging. And we have some problems with proper internet connection. So this inequality in access to quality online learning will probably affect negatively future social and economic mobility in the region. And another thing is this digital literacy. So digital literacy is limited among students and among teachers. Well, according to educators, like 64% of school students, even though they can read, they cannot understand the information they read. So it means that this online learning with like less interactive thing will affect their learning outcomes. And while teachers, the same, they use the same learning approaches and tools they have been using for offline teaching, and that doesn't work in online environment. And even in our university, which is considered as one of more advanced universities in our country and the region, even at our place, we have that people who really like resist and don't want to like learn new things and like new technologies and new platforms. One good thing is that we have change in attitude of officials, teachers, and parents towards online education. And our Ministry of Education was like strong opponent of online education, and like online programs and hybrid programs were restricted before pandemic, but now it is becoming more and more acceptable. And probably we will have this evolution of curriculum and education, which is supposed to be a long-term process. Probably we will have that faster. So I think that, well, yes, pandemic has been a global shock to education at all levels, but some countries and regions probably will have the impact that will be much deeper and have more lasting effects.
Thanks, Akila. Yeah, and I think that I'd say echoes very well also what Angus mentioned, just that this is not, the impact is not going to be the same across countries, right? And it's, you know, and thank you also for the frankness of indicating what the situation is currently, and how difficult it was to make that transition. And the fact that many students simply lack access to online resources. And that even if they have access, there's also a digital literacy gap. I thought that point that you made was also very interesting. But then, you know, of course, you ended that there was some positive indications as well that the government is changing attitudes and government officials are becoming more sensitive to the issues. And so hopefully, you know, hopefully we'll see that move in the right direction. So thank you. That was very quite interesting points. Finally, we'd like to hear from Mariski on this question. GGGI, as we all know, is an intergovernmental organization. They work in a number of countries hand in hand with governments, often sitting in the government ministries to promote economic development and sustainability. And so given your experience working with the government, what do you see as some of the main impacts the pandemic is having on education and training? Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. It's quite similar with other people. I mean, the pandemic is affecting about 45 million students in Indonesia who cannot continue their learning in schools. So same as other countries, classes are now online, including, as Akilai says, that the teacher must also then transform into e-teachers. So now even colonial generation needs to be millennials, basically, that's what we call it here. The crisis also forces schools to reallocate more budget for distant learning, and the president has also decreed through presidential regulation that the budget for the Ministry of Education is actually increased by astonishingly 96%. So it's quite big. So it's quite an investment for the new way of learning and changing habits. So I'm not sure at the moment whether this investment will last only for another year to come, because I think there's still a debate within Indonesia whether this is going to be sustained or not. There has been talks by the Minister of Education that we might want to sustain some sort of blended learning at least. So again, yeah, apart from the internet-based classes, there are also other creative channels that has been utilized, such as radio programs, even postal services for the regions with low connectivities, the national television, broadcasting classes and learning contents, because it's not just about the connections, it's about the gadgets as well. Not a lot of people have the luxury to be able to access education even before, and now that it's a little bit more tech savvy, it's a little bit overwhelming to some students as well as teachers. There are also other things that we encounter, we use in Indonesia a lot, which is other social platforms such as WhatsApp. We have a joke actually saying that we graduated from WhatsApp University because a lot of things are underway going through WhatsApp. It's really huge in Indonesia. We use it for work. I have government partners who don't even respond to emails, but very responsive in WhatsApp. Document transfer, classroom discussions, distributing tasks, and other school materials as well. But Indonesia is archipelagic and mountainous, the topography. So, and the connection is not yet, the digital divide is still quite high. So beyond the internet, it should also start to be considered how to reach everyone for inclusive learning, maybe through mobile learning, community centers, fostering public-private partnerships. I know a company cooperated with Coca-Cola to use their distribution channels to distribute materials. Those are some good examples that I think can also be fostered apart from the already being established more and more internet-based. In our work in GGGI, we are supporting the National Institute of Public Administration in Indonesia in developing the official Green Growth introductory training. It's the first official training in Indonesia. The first class was scheduled in March 2020, but it was then canceled because of the pandemic. And now we cannot hold the classical or the face-to-face learning. We have held a number of micro-learnings through a series of webinars and online sessions. And indeed, significantly, we have higher participation than if we do face-to-face trainings. So in terms of numbers, it's really good. However, we feel that there are some things that we compromise. It's the question that Angus also raised, it's quality versus quantity. So the depth of training, it's not the same. One of which is we have to reduce the designed competence from the full-scale training and having less assignments or what we call change project that participants would need to do. So maybe we need to also think about further along models for blended learning, because I think the online-based learning or ICT-based would still be there as well. Another limitation that we feel might reduce the outcome or the quality or the experience in learning is the limitation of interactions among participants, less active engagement, and we're missing the social learning aspect. I think we are at the moment with the National Institute of Public Administration, we're developing an e-learning for the green growth training, and we're thinking about what better ways, what are the good ways to put social learning aspect into e-learning as well. So my sister, for example, she's an elementary teacher. She feels quite empathetic for her pupils, her students, because she said that she feels sorry that their chance to develop the interpersonal skills and the soft skills is a little bit curbed by all this digital and online learning. So that's another thing that we need to also consider, a part of what the other panels have already mentioned. And another thing I think Akila has also mentioned about still thinking about the inclusivity in this learning, but to also ensure the scientific literacy within the curriculum, the teachers, and the students as well. I guess that's just a little bit I can say on that part, Ben.
No, thanks, Mariski. I think that was excellent points. I mean, I think your point around the digital divide is well taken. I think it's been mentioned by a few others. This is a major challenge, obviously, in developing and providing quality education at this stage. And I think your point on quantity versus quality, and this idea that when you're online, of course, you can scale, but there's massive limitations with the engagement with the students and the other participants, and this has also some inherent limitations. As panelists, as you might have seen, the chat box is extremely active today. I would definitely encourage you, if you see things that you would like to respond to in chat, please do so. I did want to go ahead and raise a few questions. I'm not sure we'll be able to get to all the questions today in the chat, because I have a feeling we'll have many. We've already had many, but there've been a few that have already been asked, and some of them are related to things you've already been talking about. So what I would suggest I'll do is I'll read off a few of the questions, and then just look. Maybe you can just indicate by your hand and let me know if you're interested in responding to any of them. But I thought one that was quite interesting, and Mariski, I think you started to respond to this as well. But this question of how is online teaching and learning different than face-to-face, and what do you see as the big challenges? And I think this lack of connection and engagement with participants was already one of those things. But it'd be interesting to hear from other panelists if they see other major challenges. And I think that's maybe just open it up with that first question. That was asked a few times by different colleagues. Angus, please.
Well, I'm going to try to be a little bit controversial here and say that, first of all, great and charismatic teaching or training is rather rare, unfortunately. But we've all experienced it, because if I asked you the question, can you think of that one teacher who inspired you as a child, you can probably visualize them at this point, or hopefully you can, and they may even have a name. You'll also know that the reason it stands out is because it's fairly rare. So my controversial point is that I think that a charismatic and great teacher will do a fantastic job face-to-face and do a fantastic job online. And of course, it's different. You have to use your imagination, your creativity. You have to put yourself in the position of the child. And of course, that position is now different because they're sitting at home in front of a screen, but that doesn't stop the great teacher from getting through. So at that level, there are differences, but I don't think they're significant. I think what we're talking about, though, probably is the good teachers. And there, I think, there will be some who respond well and others who need help. And there are thousands of stories emerging on what makes that difference. And I think this is why green learning networks that we're going to be launching later are important, so that we can share those good experiences.
Great, thanks Angus. Ramesh, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. I think taking the experience of the Civil Service College, what we do is, of course, we have online learning. Yeah, I agree with Angus. You need teachers who are dynamic, they can motivate their students. Give you the example, we had a one-day workshop, online, and the trainer was really, really good, and we didn't want to stop. We just wanted to continue with that. So that's true. You need a teacher who can really deliver online. But what we do a little bit about different from our college is, okay, we have a platform where we have courses which are online, and it's very flexible. You can start, stop whenever you want. But what we do also is to have some live sessions where we invite the participants to register. And then there is a kind of a session where they can see somebody and talk to at certain interval. And I think that's what makes them engage, and they have some groups. They can use some online platform, like Zoom or Microsoft Teams, for example. And then they can discuss and they can talk the experience and share the experience. I think this is how we can make them engage on online platforms.
Ramesh, thank you. And it's interesting because that actually also responds to a few other questions we received in chat. I mean, there were some specific questions about, how many hours, for instance, are ideal to keep children online in a classroom. I know this is something, as a parent of 2 young children, we struggle with as our kids have been engaged in remote learning. I think your ideas as well. And there was a question about blended learning. Isn't blended learning the future of education? So I don't know if any other panelists would like to comment on that specific question in terms of best practices or what they've seen has been quite effective during this period. If not, what I would do then is I would probably shift to another series of questions that we received in chat, partly because they really link very closely to what I was hoping to ask next as well, which is really about the status quo. And particularly now shifting away from education in general and COVID to looking at environmental education around a sustainable environment, or what we can call green education, if you will. But there were a few questions about that really I think follow up on some of the comments you made in the first round, which is around how do we ensure a digital education system is more just and that no one is left behind? How can we ensure that we have all-inclusive participation from everyone around the world? And I think these are critical questions, particularly when we think about what's happened with green learning today. And so I'd like to just open this question up as well. And so perhaps this time I'll start, Angus, with you. And it'd be very interesting to hear from you on what you see are the risks from the current approach to green learning. And if there are risks, maybe you don't see any risks, and how you might envision that we could ultimately overcome these.
I was hoping I could go last, but maybe I'll go last on the last question, so I can benefit from everybody else's inputs. I'm scribbling madly, by the way, because I'm as much a learner as anything else in this debate. Well, I mean, a couple of obvious points to begin with. First of all, I find it quite difficult to sort of separate out the risks to green learning from more general risks to education. I mean, I think they're kind of, many of them are the same. If I was to talk about green learning or learning about the green economy or sustainability, this kind of thing, of course I'm going to, because I'm, Division for Planet, as you correctly said at the beginning, Ben, I'm going to say one of the problems is there isn't enough of it. We're trying to build a more sustainable global economy on a very narrow base of knowledge, in the sense that there are many, many highly expert people, but not enough of, enough who understand at least enough to make the difference. And that's why I think that a lot of well-meant funding and technical assistance sometimes doesn't really deliver, because you just don't have the knowledge base to work with, and that's because we don't have enough of this content. Civil service training institutions, for example, in many countries in which we work, for them, training on green economy is a very minor thing, and they're asking us, well, how do we do this? As if it's something new. I mean, I'm over 50. I spent my life on this. It's not new at all. So not enough of it is a major risk for us at this time. We need to spread it. But more generally, of course, the digital divide is a huge thing. And as we become better at it, we're actually increasing that digital divide. This was one of the main features or main areas of discussion at HLPF this year. So there are questions of bandwidth and access to data and so on. There's an interesting case that we've come across in Mexico. So I don't know if there are people online listening from Mexico, but we understand that the Mexico experience is that they've been using the television quite widely in general education. I think that's been done in other countries as well, but I believe Portugal as well has done this. So that has had a mass outreach and coverage. But then, of course, you still have to submit your work as a student, and that submission process, is hampered by by bandwidth issues and digital issues and so on. So we see some elements of it working and other elements not being so good. So I mean, I'm just picking up a little bit on what others have said about this, which is that, for want of a better term, we need to become more technology agnostic. What I mean by that is that there is learning that needs to happen, but the way that learning is transmitted needs to suit the situation which you're in. In other words, it cannot be just about online. We have to look at all possible measures: public radio, television, smartphone SMS, non-smartphone SMS, traditional printed materials. Somebody mentioned Coca-Cola and using their distribution networks to get materials to schools and so on and so forth. If we're going to crack this inequality thing, we've got to be technology agnostic. And it's actually a term that's come from a study done by University of London, which is quite recent on this. So I think that's would be one point. I've got others, but I don't want to hog the time, so I'll hand back to you on that one.
Great, thanks Angus. And I know it's interesting, the concept of technology agnostic, and I think it's it's trying to be as practical as well, right? It's pragmatic to address some of the constraints. And your comment that there isn't enough of it is also well received, and certainly it's something that we've seen as well and would agree with. Akalai, maybe I'll turn to you next, if that's okay, because obviously in the first set of questions you mentioned some of the challenges, and I'd be curious also maybe it hasn't been done, but you mentioned that the government has been more supportive of, and there was a question in the chat around subsidies, whether the governments have been subsidizing or considering subsidizing to grant access. So I'd be just interested in your thoughts on this, on where you see the status quo currently for green education. Do you perceive current risks? Is there any way to overcome this?
Yeah, thank you. So the government has started supporting online education more, but in terms of green learning, it's not that supportive, unfortunately. And we currently have, at least on regional and country level, the risks related to the lack of knowledge and expertise, limited human capacity, and I guess in this sense we need an assistance and cooperation with international community and joining different international networks where we could get more expertise and knowledge. And I guess in that sense, online, I mean, people moving online might help us because we could reach people easier in this sense. We also have a lack of understanding from the politicians, and it is related to the lack of funds that are going into green learning. But green learning and green growth policies, they have long-term beneficial effects, but they lead to this cost of transaction when, let's say, the universities, they have to train and retrain their faculty and staff. We need to introduce programs and new courses and develop new learning materials. And for now, they're not that popular yet. I mean, the population is not that much also knowledgeable about all of these movements. And with the COVID-19 and poor economic growth prospects, this public financing is limited. And also we probably will face some challenges related to private revenues of universities. So this investment in green learning is becoming more challenging without the help of international organizations. And another thing is that even if the government would be willing to invest more, investing in green learning needs a strong public support. And both the population and government should be okay with prioritizing climate change and green recovery as a way to live in post-COVID-19 world and as a long-term strategy. And for now, what we've been observing is that both the general population and the government, they are prioritizing other things like government debt, fighting corruption. We had elections in October that have been canceled, and we have this political protests now in Kyrgyzstan. So we have lots of other issues, and they are attracting much more attention. And then these investments into green learning, they are decreasing, and we are facing the risk of stopped investments into that. And well, at least in such risky areas like Kyrgyzstan, and I'm sure there are many other countries that are having the same challenges, the role of international organizations is becoming more important in terms of developing a global green growth framework and promoting green learning.
Thanks, Aklaya. And that's maybe a fantastic segue to Mariski, to turn it over to you as an intergovernmental organization that's supporting this kind of activity. And there was a question also in chat around about this, and GGGI and UNITAR's and other IGO commitment to education and training. I mean, I'd be very interested in your thoughts and really responding to Aklaya. Do you see this? Do you see increased demand? Do you see increased opportunity to support countries around green learning and education?
Yeah, well, that's actually one of the risks that I also want to raise for the green learning, because as Aklaya mentioned, it's not yet that popular. It's and it's not commonly understood in the same way. So let me talk about the perspective from our civil servant trainings, because civil servant is the engine of bureaucracy. We see that some of the risk is that it's the demand, the drive, and the interest from them is not as high as we had hoped for. So some sort of promotions and some sort of more institutionalized way would help on that. And if it's within allow me to speak within the perspective of civil servants. So civil servants' functions and roles, job rotations, if it's not related to their jobs and etc., then it's difficult to get a consistent active participations or even demand from them. So that is one of the reasons why GGGI is working with the National Institute of Public Administration to insert this training into a formal government training. And it's not just us. I think UNITAR, UN Page, also developing a low carbon development Indonesia training and modules in Indonesia as well. So international support really helps because in Indonesia itself, it's still very limited. And when it comes to limitation, it's not just the issues or the knowledge and etc. It's also the trainers. When we talk about trainings, we don't have that pool of expertise. We pool of trainers just yet, or facilitators to be able to deliver green growth trainings and etc. So we need to build that. And it would be great if we can also access these trainers, expert facilitators, these knowledge resources from all around the world as well. And another risk that we see is there's always a limited budget for learning, and also time commitment for that. So it would be great also to make learning accessible to everyone. We are currently developing the e-learning for green growth in a self-paced method. So it will be the first full e-learning that is self-paced for formal government training. But we also need to think more about the varied participants' learning styles in order for the learning to be effective. The contents, the methods, ensuring that the learning is quite interesting, engaging. We have mixed channels that needs to be considered, and inserting some sort of methods for social learning, because we don't want to just give them knowledge, but we want to also have them to develop some of the soft skills. We call it in our learning the 3H approach: heart, head, and hand, as a complete learning. The heart is for the will, because we're hopeful that the will, the political will, the empathy, the conscience, the drive, and the motivation to go to adopt a green growth paradigm would be developed. And then also for the head is for the ideas, the means and ways to be formulated when they have the knowledge, knowing how to plan and finance green development. And then the hand is, by the end of it, with a strong commitment and initiative to make changes through actions at work and even at personal life, to become more green persons. And in the end, some of the risks towards current approach in our experience is the incentive for the participants, for the trainees. It needs to be clear and define what benefits they get from the learning. In terms of civil servants, what do they get? Is it just certificates? They do have mandatory about 20 hours of learning every year that they have to take, but it would also be better if green growth learning or green learning, etc., would help them. They give them opportunity to grow and excel in their work, and even if it could help in their career pathway.
Thanks, Mariski. And it's interesting, you know, with your comments, you really started by indicating that you had anticipated perhaps that the green learning courses would be more popular. This is one of the main risks. And it's interesting because, you know, obviously, Angus, you mentioned that you've seen an increase in interest at the same time, right? You've seen this spike in demand. And so it might be useful at some stage, maybe after we have a chance to hear from Ramesh, to tease this out a bit and see what might be taking place, why we see such an increase in demand in one set of trainings, whereas we're seeing a decreased demand or difficulty in generating demand in another context. But thank you, Mariski, also for the heart, head, and hand approach. That's a nice way to frame what the training is about. Ramesh, so I'd be very interested in your thoughts. Obviously, you know, you lead a professional public servant education institute, and you know, it'd be both this idea of, you know, are you seeing increased demand? Do you see that it's a challenge around green education? Any risks that you perceive that you've identified?
Yeah, I think the risks which are there is in terms of enforcement. You know, we can teach, you know, green learning, but it's about implementation. But I think it's about what the government does. For example, what we have done in Mauritius recently at the cabinet is they have come up with e-procurement, and they have made it a mandatory now. All the ministries, they have to do procurement 100% online, you know, e-procurement. So this is one way I think the college steps in to offer training about green learning. But also it's a clever way. What we did was, you know, if you have a module on green economy, on green, people are not interested to come in. What you need to do is to cleverly integrate those learning in some modules that you do. What we did with the help of Paige, we have a training on project management. All ministries, they have to manage projects, right? So we have a training on project management and strategic thinking. What we did was to bring trainers from Page and Unitar. They did bring trainer, and we start training our trainers at the college how to integrate green learning in those kind of sessions. Unfortunately, then you can see that the public servants, they are listening, they are learning about what it is about green economy, and we have done that over the past year, and we have trained about more than 600 civil servants on those modules. And I'm happy to say today, actually, in the Parliament, there is a climate change bill which has been passed. And I'm sure that there have been people who have been working at the Ministry of Environment. They have been following our courses. So I'm not saying that we are totally responsible with the college, but I think we have contributed a little bit about inculcating a bit of those competencies to build up that bill. So this is one way I think we should integrate. Don't have one specific module on green economy. You won't get that much people coming online to learn it, but integrate green learning into those training sessions, bit by bit. I think you'll get more buy-in from public servants. I think this is how our experience is working.
Yeah, it's a very interesting set of points, Ramesh, and it'd be interesting maybe just to circle back and kind of link it, Angus and Akalay and Mariski, also to this question of demand and a demand for green education, and whether why we might be seeing this difference in demand, at perhaps at the global level. I know Unitar also works at the national level, but your specific experiences as well, and then I think, and then finally, the next question we'll turn to is really around green recovery, and so we'll turn to that in a second. But this one, before we get there, I really want to kind of tease out this question around demand. I don't know if any colleagues are willing to take up that challenge. Angus, I'm looking at you because you said the demand was so high, for Unitar. So I wonder if you have a sense of what might be, why we might be seeing this dichotomy.
Well, I mean, we're seeing an increase, but I mean, I'm not a statistician. And if there was a statistician looking at our numbers, they might say, well, it's not significant. I mean, we host a global platform. We have about 400,000 users, which is not that many. And within that community, we're seeing an increased completion rate going on. So there's obviously, at a global level, amongst a certain strata, that there is a bit of a kick. But that's a very different set of metrics to what Mariski's been talking about in the context of one country and the dynamics that are going on there, where there's a whole range of other factors that come into play. So I don't think the two are comparable. I mean, I do hear that the event is saying on the one hand is going up and on the other hand is going down, but I think they're two very different dynamics. So that would be my response.
That's right, and I mean that makes sense. Are there any other colleagues that would like to Akalay, please?
Yeah, well, I want to say that, well, as a university, we actually see that like in 4 or 5 years, we will have like more demand in labor markets for like this green knowledge and green skills. But we need to start preparing now. That's why we have this like increased demand by teachers and educators to get like additional training and additional knowledge. So that is the same for other universities in our country. Like we have this alliance network of universities, and we see more like professors interested in getting like additional training specifically related to green economy and green learning. But I guess for like more general population, as they didn't really face that like demand in labor market yet, probably they are still like not really understanding, and like that demand is a little bit behind. But well, at least for the colleges and universities that are planning 4 or 5 years ahead, we certainly see this increase in interest.
No, that's a very interesting point. Mariski, over to you.
Yeah, actually the demand or the interest is also being generated at the moment. I mean, it's quite new in Indonesia as well, and I'm specifically talking at the market of civil servants for this training. So we don't know what we don't know, right? So when we introduced this in the beginning, we don't directly develop the complete green growth training, but we integrate it into the existing training as sessions and etc. And then we have certain kind of marketings of these trainings by having various methods and various sessions. So, and then it generates interest. But when it comes to when we foresee as a risk in the future is that when it becomes a training that's available to them, the way they would demand it, the way they would take it is will be based on the government training budget, which is quite low, yeah? and the approval from their superiors or their bosses to take the trainings. And if it doesn't directly relate to their training, then it will be difficult for them to gain knowledge. You know, it's not an incentive that they, oh, it's because I want to know more. You know, it could be something for their personal, but they might not prioritize that. However, so I think in the next question, Ben, in the next discussion topic, I'd also like to talk about the opportunity how this green growth training may also be demanded more by civil servants.
Yeah, I think it's a good time to move to that final topic as well. And you know, and I think both of you, Akilai and Mariski, you both echoed what Ramesh said as well, right? It's sometimes it's not about having a course that's designated green economy course, environmental education course, but it's actually incorporating some of those concepts, some of those key concepts into other training, and that can be much more effective at the end of the day. And I think it was a very important point. Okay, so we have a final question that we really wanted the panel to take a look at today, and that really brings us back around again to COVID and to the pandemic, and really to think through both in your own experiences now, but also just in the future, and what you might hope could potentially be the role of education and training institutions in a green recovery. What sort of opportunities do you see? Obviously, there's going to be some challenges as well. We've chatted about some of the challenges, and then looking as well a bit more at some of the new types of learning groups that are being created through peer sharing, through networks, etc. So this time, I'd like to, if I could, Akilai, if I could turn it over to you initially for your thoughts on this.
Yeah, sure. So I guess we all can agree that green recovery requires people. It requires people in private and public sectors that have the knowledge and skills to implement green recovery policies. And therefore, investment in educating and training these people at different levels is essential for economic recovery and climate action. And like if they are sufficient, these investments, they can multiply these positive effects. But then if there is lack of such investments, it can hinder the growth and make it more challenging. And well, we have been working, I mean, our university has been working on building the capacity of skills of policymakers and university teachers in our country. And we already have some support from Page and UNITAR for that. So we are developing free e-learning courses on different topics needed for green recovery, like green economy, trade, green and sustainable finance, climate change, that take into account specific needs and interests of regional and national economies. I think that is important because there are lots of resources already available, but of course we always need to adapt them and take into account the local needs. And well, within the same project, we are already having like some trainings by ILO on green job assessments in Kyrgyzstan. Again, it is like the model that was adapted for our country. And the thing is that we see that more people are participating in the training than the last year. And the e-courses and online training probably helped it a bit. so that people don't really have to spend time on like traveling somewhere and going somewhere. They can sit at home and like join us. And also like the green learning itself is becoming more popular and demanded among universities. Well, for the information exchange and coordination of activities, probably and like even in like providing this type of events, we need, of course, some help. And well, for regions like Central Asia, we have limited green learning resources. Like again, the capacity that we have is limited, and then like building this network with others is becoming more and more important. Well, for the university where I work, we have this thing of moving and becoming more like green and sustainable campus, but it will take a long time. And again, we are learning from others. So I guess here, in terms of green recovery and like role of education and training institutions in it, it's a lot about using local capacity, but also learning from others.
Thanks. Yeah, I was just sorry, I was just taking some notes. Yeah, it is very interesting. You know, and I think your point about the fact that ultimately this is about people, right? And the recovery will ultimately be about people as well. And to the extent that this can help generate and build on itself is very interesting. So maybe if I could turn it next to Mariski, it'd be very interesting to hear from your thoughts as well. You know, you mentioned that you had some ideas on how education and learning could contribute to green recovery. So over to you.
Yeah, it's really there's a very good opportunity now, especially in the context of Indonesia. For the very first time, we now have a green national development plan. This is the very first time that emission reductions has been equalized into the target of development as economic growth and etc. So the tagline is you know, toward build back better. So in that, we see that after pandemic, it's usually the emission production rose up, and it's not just the 2008 crisis after the Spanish flu and etc. We see that recovery efforts actually produce far more emissions. So when it comes to that, we have the National Development Plan, the Green National Development for the first time. For the economic recovery, we need green growth pathways. And one of the key is the change in paradigm and capacity or competency of the civil servants to do so. So that is the role of the learning institutions, of the green learning and etc. As the main actors, the governments, they still have limited capacities within their institutions, and even the staff, the officials, for the aptitude, the competency, the knowledge or the know-how, and even the general understanding on what it means. I see there's a question actually, Bent, in the chat, that what is the value of green knowledge? It takes time, but how do we turn knowledge into action? Well, when we have institutions providing green growth trainings, then hopefully that we can have these questions answered on how to plan better, on how you can build back better after the pandemic, how you can still recover your economy but not hurt social welfare, social safeguards, and environment in that, on how you can finance your development in a more greener way. So those are kind of things that could turn into actions if we have enough resources and institutions to provide the green learning or green growth trainings in that way. So that's kind of the things that I think would be the core value of having these green trainings or green knowledge, because then you can have a greener planning, greener budgeting, green investment, develop green jobs that would sustain, and hopefully when there are future shocks, hopefully there won't be, but if there are any other shocks coming along, that we would be more resilient, we will be more prepared, and we can bounce back better.
Yeah, thanks, Mirsky. And I think I think you raised a couple of very interesting points. I mean, certainly the critical role that the government commitment makes as it begins to respond to COVID and the pandemic. Governments around the world, as we know, are making major commitments to this, both from a financial perspective, but also from a policy perspective. And it's interesting to see also some of the commitments governments are making on international stages, whether they're climate commitments or biodiversity commitments. And often there is a gap between when the commitment is made and that implementation, and that gap often includes a capacity gap, right? A capacity and the ability of the government officials and other professionals to actually deliver on those commitments. Ramesh, I guess I'm very interested, given your role training government officials, your institute's role in training government officials. This is how you also see things. Do you also see that this is kind of an interesting opportunity, but also a challenge?
Yeah, I think opportunities is great because we are working with Paige and UNITA. What we did was we went to the island of Rodrigues as public officers, school teachers or public officers. What we wanted to do was to show them the various platforms that they can use to teach children about green economy. Students primary level, they have never heard about green economy. They have heard about sustainable development. But for us was to try to introduce those concepts about green economy. So what we did a workshop with school teachers. And in that forum, in that workshop, we invited NGOs and even people from the ministries, they call them commission there. And we did a workshop of how to integrate green learning into the classroom. Interesting, at the end, in the afternoon session, I would say, the chief commissioner, which is equivalent to a prime minister, he attended the workshop, which is very rare to find that. So if you get commitment from the top, that's what I wanted to say, is you get the buy-in from them. You'll show that you'll be doing your plan will go well into integrating this green economy. But what came out was an eagerness from Rodrigue Island, and what at the end we created a network. We call it Green Rodrigue Awareness for Children Network. What was that meant to be? There are sometimes we have too many resources, or we have too many people who are engaged in green economy learning, teaching, or we have NGOs, doing green economy work, and there's certain overlapping. So this network, what it will be doing is trying to reorganize and do a good planning. So for example, in Rodrigue, there are 3 NGOs which are very active in terms of environment. So now what they have agreed is to form part of this network. And in that network, there will be representative from the commissions, from the Ministry of Education, Environment, and Culture. And at the same time, you'll have 2 educators from secondary, 2 educators from primary, and it will be for a period of 2 years. So they are creating a network, and they themselves, the people from Rodrigue Island, they have come up with this idea. So we're empowering them. We're just giving them hints, we're just giving them some tools. For example, we have introduced them to a UNCC modules on climate change for children. And you can see there's an eagerness for them to take those modules, and they want to integrate that in their curriculum. And I think this is what we need to do. We need certain people who are active, and when you see your top leader is coming to a workshop, it means that they want this to happen in an island. And I think we have the people that they have shown that that willingness to adopt green economy. And Rodrigue is a fantastic island that can showcase what we are doing in terms of green economy. The circular economy is working fantastically well there, I can say.
Yeah, that's an extremely exciting example. I didn't catch the name of the network though. If you could just
we call it Green Rodrigues Awareness for Children Network. So it's basically meant for children. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting, and I think what's interesting is these kinds of examples, these success stories, right? And how do we create a system where we can begin to share those? So you have a great success story. How can we have then perhaps more, even at the global level, between countries or between communities, share some of those success stories? I think that goes back a little bit to what Mariski and Akulai were recommending as well. So Angus, you asked to be the last on this question, so I've granted your wish. Very interested in your thoughts on this. I mean, obviously we've heard three really interesting experiences at the national and local level, and you provide also sort of the global view because you work in so many different countries. Yeah, I'd be very interested in your thoughts on how you see that education and training should be contributing to a green recovery.
Thank you so much, Ben and colleagues. I must say, I'm always terribly jealous of Ramesh's examples because he's just got a whole stack of brilliant, engaging, thought-provoking examples which are fresh and current. I don't know how you do it, Ramesh, but you've been doing this for years, and that's probably why you're on the call today. So, look, I've got 4 points to make on this question. The role of education training institutions in a green recovery. Well, first and foremost, because we're facing this COVID challenge, first and foremost, we need to fill the void that has been created by that. So filling the void in the more traditional face-to-face learning by rapidly adapting our systems so that those that we are reaching and seeking to reach don't lose out. It's an obvious point to make. We've all been doing it to a lesser or greater extent. We've been leveraging technology, we've been leveraging our ideas, our creativity, and there are thousands and thousands of stories of success and not so much success that we're accumulating as a global civilization on this. And I do say a global civilization because it's something that is impacting on the world, and it's extraordinary. I mean, for me, the positive side of the shared experience and exchange is it's a bit like climate change. It's a calamity and something that is affecting all of us, but it's also an opportunity to learn more about each other. So I put it in the same category. So we need to rapidly adapt, and I think we're doing that, but there are gaps, as the conversation has already evoked. The second thing is that training institutions, educational institutions need to continue to innovate and find new ways of working, improving the learning experience online, ensuring that you're not losing the social side of things, blending where you can, and recognizing that as we go more and more online, demand or the expectations of learners, of users, is going to continue to increase. In fact, it's going to multiply. So the types of ways that we are projecting knowledge and learning sort of this year will rapidly change as people demand more. So we're going to have to be agile. We're going to have to continue to experiment with new ways. And many of the, there's much that's come out of this discussion. I just picked up, somebody was saying online, for example, what about mentoring? Can we do mentoring online? Yes, absolutely, we can do mentoring online. Actually, we're already doing it to some extent, but that kind of more direct types of supplements, if you like, to the more traditional online is going to be necessary. So we need to innovate. But then, of course, as has been said, we're only going to do this as training and educational institutions effectively if we network more, we learn more from each other about what works and what doesn't work quite so well. So peer learning, absolutely critical, and that's why we're launching the Green Learning Network in a moment today, and that's really what it's all about. And then fourthly and finally, I just want to reiterate this point about being technology agnostic and recognizing the situation for what it is and finding the right way of filling the gap according to what's available. Be it public radio or be it more traditional approaches. So those are my takeaways, and I mean this whole discussion has been hugely enriching and has filled I've filled my notepad with tons of examples, and there's been many in the chat box as well. So I want to thank you, Ben, for the way you've orchestrated this, and handing back to you, it's been a fascinating dialogue.
Thanks, Angus. And of course, we haven't had time to address all of the questions. I think with the launch that will take place in just a moment, hopefully we'll be able to look at some of those as well through that. But we do have a few minutes before the launch. We have about 6 minutes, I would say. And it might be interesting if the panel is willing to just in 1 minute, if you could provide sort of one key takeaway point for the participants in today's discussion that you would like them to go away with from the discussion, or it may be a call for action. But I'd be very interested to hear if you have one sort of key point you'd like to make before we close the panel part of today's webinar. And so this time, Ramesh, I'll begin as we started. I'll begin with you.
Okay, I think my message is, sometimes we have limited resources. I think we have to think very, very well for future generation. And I think we all need to be part of this elan, that we all need to contribute toward making this world better for future generation. And I think if we stay healthier, take care of the environment, take care of the society, we'll have a better living, and future generation can really enjoy it. And I think that's what we all want to achieve in the end.
Excellent, thank you. Very inspiring. Akile, over to you.
I also wanted to say something similar. It actually goes along with the mission of our university, like educating future leaders. And I guess in terms of our today's webinar, it is also, we need to educate the youth and build the next generation of leaders who understand the importance of green growth and can bring structural change for that. But, well, even though it's hard to change the mindset of current policymakers, the future generations are totally capable of doing that if we help them to learn and know more about green economy and its importance.
Excellent, well said. Mariski, to you now, please.
Yeah, it's the same way. Hopefully everyone's very interested in green economy, understanding by first starting to know the benefits of it for us, for our countries, and for the planet. This is the only planet that we live in, so please, we need to take care of it together, and we need to sustain it for future generations to come. We have the director for the Division of Planet here. I'm sure he agrees that going green is the way forward, the way that we need to sustain our lives, we need to make our welfare more better and better. So if you don't understand it yet, start small, but do start for that.
Excellent, thanks, Mariski. And so as you mentioned, absolutely, it's a good way to start, to be humble, but also with a clear vision going forward. So Angus, yes, the director of the division on the planet. It sounds like a superhero, that's what we need right now. So any final thoughts, Angus?
Well, in my defense, I did not select the title myself, but I would say that the reason I have this extraordinary title is because UNITAR is organized around the pillars, if you like, of the Agenda 2030. So there's also a director for peace. So that's a pretty tough job as well. But look, here's a planetary image for you. I'm looking out of my window now, and there's an old tree that I happen to know was planted sometime in the 1960s, and it would have started off as a precarious sapling. Who would have known its future, right? Wouldn't quite have known what might have happened. Maybe the wind would have come along and knocked it over, or whatever. Anyway, that didn't happen, and this is now 60 odd years later, and it's this huge thing, massive, dominates the whole garden and the view, to be honest. And that's kind of what we're doing, because in the education and training world, we don't have the luxury of knowing what the immediate effect of our work is, but we know that it can be overwhelmingly important and significant. And we've just got to make sure that this green learning sapling or saplings that we're planting, you know, that enough of them continue and become this overwhelming thing. Because, you know, to be honest, I don't really see the difference between green learning and any other type of learning. As has been said today, it is an integral part of learning and should be that way. And so that would be my image that I would leave with you. Thank you.
Yeah, it's an excellent image. Well, thank you to our panelists. I would encourage you just to keep your cameras on. We're going to shift the program slightly, as you know. We're going to, in a moment, launch the new Green Learning Network. I did want to mention that a number of questions have been asked in the chat today. Some of them we've been able to address. A few we haven't been able to address. In addition to the questions, there's been fantastic comments, and it's great to see the participants sharing links and tools and information with each other. We did have a few questions that I think are directly related to the launch that's about to happen. We had a question around, or a comment and a question around the importance of online tools, the usefulness of free e-learning tools. Angus, you mentioned the question on online mentoring. And then this idea that was discussed in the panel, but also in the chat, about the importance of highlighting successful and impactful greening projects, and how, you know, are there ways that we can to showcase those. And so without further ado, it is now my great pleasure to welcome Maya Valceva, who is a program officer on green and circular economy with UNITAR, and along with my colleague at the GDKP, Inwu, has been leading the effort to establish the Green Learning Network. Maya, it is my pleasure to invite you to formally launch this new network and hopefully tell everyone a bit about this exciting initiative going forward. Over to you, Maya.
Thank you, Ben. Really, I'm very excited to be here and to have listened to all of you and all of your inspiring stories and examples. As mentioned by Ben and by others, we're really extremely happy and excited today to use these amazing platforms provided to us in the framework of the Rebuilding Better webinar series to formally launch today the Green Economy Learning Network. It has been in the pipelines for over a year now, so we're very happy to formally give birth to this initiative today with all of you online. So firstly, if we can go to the first slide, why do we actually need a Green Learning Network? What is the rationale for its creation? And as our distinguished speakers touched upon today, the benefits from collaborating and from working together are many, so I won't go into too much detail on this, but suffice it to say that the skills, the knowledge, the attitudes, those are the foundations that we need to have in place in order to build upon them a sustainable future for our children and for the planet. And this is, however, easier said than done, and it's easier to understand it than to act upon it. It is actually very hard for learning institutions to overcome some of the administrative or financial or limitations or lack of resources, lack of knowledge, and to innovate and to reform their curricula and make sure that their academic programs correspond to the new realities and include sustainability learning. And despite those difficulties, many universities around the world are actually taking actions. They are creating new programs, new initiatives, and delivering more and more on the need for green learning. And we've been seeing that at UNITAR with Angus. We have seen Ramesh do amazing things, Akilai. However, it's difficult for universities to do all of that by themselves. And as Akilai and others have mentioned, there is a lot that can be gained from universities joining forces and learning from each other and sharing resources. And this is exactly the reason why we're setting today the Green Learning Network, to leverage the power of the many and to give universities a dedicated platform to publicize their work and to come together and to work collaboratively. And as we can see on the next slide, the way that the Green Learning Network aims to achieve those ambitious objectives is through setting in place 3 interconnected elements. So firstly, we have created together with GGKP our trusted partners, a publicly accessible catalog, library of learning resources where anyone interested to find courses or academic programs or events on green economy learning can browse and find suitable training resources that they need. And this is also a place for institutions where they can publish information about their existing courses or materials and create visibility around them and find more students and more learners. Secondly, we have a collaborative element to the network. So the network aims to create a space, a dedicated space for professionals, learning professionals, to come together, learn from each other and exchange ideas, experiences, and learning resources. They can ask questions, they can find partners, ask for advice, maybe even start creating jointly different learning programs. We really want to see these initiatives grow in many different ways, and we want it to be demand-driven from the members, that is you who are online today. And thirdly, we want to keep members informed and inspired, yeah, and to just drive future actions through this network. So with that in mind, we are going to set up in place also a regular stream of online events, webinars, probably short trainings and discussions on various topics. And once again, this is very much a demand-driven element of the network. So those are the three interconnected elements of the network. And as mentioned today, it's the day that we're formally launching the initiatives. But this is not a static initiative. This is a very much a living project. So in the next weeks and months, it will grow and it will change to reflect some of the needs of the learning community. So as we can see on the next slide, I'm going to take you in the next slide through some of the things that we have actually created, that we have already set in place, as well as some of the elements that are coming up shortly. So on this next slide, you can see the landing page of the Learning Hub, where you can find the various learning resources and create awareness for the work of your respective institutions to find suitable learning products. To access the Learning Hub, you need to go to the GGKP website, and there will be a mega tab on the homepage, which is called Learn, and you click on it and you come to the landing page of the Learning Network. From there, you can choose course, programs, webinars, or you can find where you can see the new resources and developments, and then you can also further browse by different categories such as duration and cost, thematic area, and others. Then, with regard to the second elements of the network, the collaborative and exchange elements of practitioners, if we can go to the next slide, and we have created, again on the GGKP website, a page which presents the Green Learning Network as an initiative. It includes information about what this network is about. It also lists some of the blogs and articles and related resources for the network, and in the future you can also access different recordings from online events through the event sections. So this page is basically a card, visitor's card for the initiative, so that you can just see at a glance what this network is all about. And from that page, you can find ways to actually go to the different collaborative spaces which we're setting up within the Green Learning Network. And for now, we are setting up two collaborative spaces, the LinkedIn community as well as the Green Learning Network. So yes, on this slide, you can see a screenshot of the learning LinkedIn group, which is the previous one actually, which we invite you very much to come and to join and start exchanging with us directly after the webinar. We can continue the discussion on some of the important issues that we touched upon today, and answer some of the questions that you posed through the chat window. And we really look forward to hearing from you and discussing what you think about this network and this initiative and how it can be useful for you. And as I mentioned, we also invite you to join our newsletter, which you can see a screenshot on the slide from, and this way you can't miss any of the events and resources and discussions happening around the Green Learning Network. You can subscribe for the newsletter via a link which my colleague Nikki will be able to post for you in the chat section. And lastly, as I had mentioned, the third element of the Green Learning Network is a series of live and online events on different topics. So that's on the next slide. This slide actually is just a placeholder of all the topics that we can discuss together through the Green Learning Network. But we look forward to hearing from you what are actually the topics that you care about, that you want to discuss with us. And this is what is going to drive the selection of the topics that will be discussed in this section of the network. So my last slide is basically just a call for action. So please join us and let's work together and try and find a way to upscale learning for green economy. It would be great to hear from you. Tell us through the LinkedIn group and through email what interests you and how we can work together. Me and my colleague Nikki, we look forward to hearing from you and engaging with you, and Nikki will actually be the dedicated community manager for the network. With that, we've come to the end of the presentation, but we look forward to actually continuing the conversation online with you via the collaborative channels of the Green Learning Network. Thank you very much, and especially thanks to the partners from GGKP and from PAGE who have supported this initiative, and to all the learning professionals who have inspired it.
Thanks, Maya. Thank you. Thanks to you and Wu, as you know, you guys have been obviously spearheading this initiative for some time. It's fantastic to see that it's been launched. Congratulations. It's extremely exciting. It's exciting to see how, yeah, absolutely, Angus. It's exciting to see also that it can respond to a lot of the questions, a lot of the comments that were raised. And I think that's and you know, and as Angus alluded to, you know, this is a seed, a sapling that we will all work towards trying to build over the years and ensure that it grows. So with this, I would now like to say a sincere thank you to all of our panelists for today. Akilai, Mariski, Ramesh, Angus, thank you so much for providing us with your insight and for allowing us to tap into your expertise. It's been absolutely fantastic discussion. Really appreciate it. Thanks again, of course, to the UNITAR colleagues, Angus, Maya, and others for organizing today's webinar with us. It's a partnership. It's something we truly cherish and are happy to move forward with you on the Green Learning Network as well. And final thanks to all of the participants from around the world for your incredible engagement in this discussion. The chat was incredibly active. There were some excellent questions, some challenging questions as well, and we greatly appreciate those. And with this, I believe we can conclude today's webinar. I encourage you to please keep in touch, keep the conversations going, and reach out to join the new Green Learning Network. With that, thank you all. Thank you.
Bye.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.